So I'm Arthur, and I'm a global publishing producer for World of Warships, working out of Minsk. And what that means is that I am generally responsible for taking the characteristics and the information from all of the regions where we run the game and bring that back to the development team so that they know what we generally can and cannot do with features, with how the game is balanced and how it looks like for each of those regions. And then obviously I try to make them implement that into the game.
So
That's
it's a lot of
basically
working
it.
with the regions. But what do you do, like? What does your day to day look like then? Are you hanging out with the dev team in St. Petersburg, or are you working in Minsk? What does your day to day look like?
Um, no, so most of us in the global team we sit in Minsk. We do visit the dev team fairly often. It's like once every 2 or 3 weeks. We go there for a few days to talk to those guys, and obviously we talk to them on Skype on a daily basis anyway. But the daily routine is mostly just talking to a lot of people and responding to their emails and all that sort of admin stuff. It sounds boring, but it's actually a lot of communication coordination stuff for all of the things that are ongoing as sort of projects within our game. So it can be anything from talking to marketing and giving feedback on our trailers as they're in production, um, talking to community about an event that's running, talking to customer service about whether there are any major issues and how we can help solve them. Um, yeah, all that sort of stuff. Talking about upcoming premium ships and how they're balanced, whether they're ready to be deployed and sold. Yeah, it can be anything.
So it sounds like it's a lot of balancing act between obviously the regions, but then also between the producers, the publishing producers, and the dev team. So it's like you're kind of working two different fronts at once.
Yeah, it's kind of trying to make everybody happy and then trying to not to fail with most of them, because obviously you can never make everybody happy at the same time, but you try to do that for the most people that's possible.
So is there a sort of philosophy or sort of something that you sort of stick to when you're making these decisions that helps you sort of determine which region and which things should go forward and which one should not? Is there some sort of I don't know bigger idea that comes to mind when you're deciding this stuff?
That heavily depends on what it is. So obviously there's different philosophies and different priorities between the regions depending on what we're talking about. Um, for let's say for balancing, obviously there's like a um, different type of feedback coming from each region about how that should go. For what kind of cultural stuff should be displayed or shown, for example, in trailers, that has a totally different dynamic behind it, and people say different things about that as well. So here we're talking about whether, for example, some regions will say that they are more sensitive to certain topics, like balancing or like I don't know, talking about um, war in general or that sort of stuff. So it's different. We do have a few major philosophies where we say, okay, this is how we do things within this sort of sphere or this general topic. But it's a lot of yeah, it's like I said before, it's a balancing act most of the time for those seeing what situation we are in right now and what we can do for everybody to be happy and to reach their goals.
Yeah, you mentioned premium ships there and balancing that, and I'm sure that's a that's a hot topic you have to deal with constantly. At least I know you're getting feedback from us all the time on it. When specifically about that, because I know it's different for each one. What are you thinking when you're looking at balancing a premium ship, and what kind of things are going through your mind? I think you might have talked about this at the Gamescom article as well.
So at Gamescom, we were asked how we choose ships in general. So that's kind of a separate topic from balancing. So generally speaking, we choose ships. Um, for a tech tree first, and then sort of the leftovers from that, so to speak, have a chance of becoming premium ships based on whether they bring something interesting to the table. Of course, that's not all that it is. Sometimes or rather, once each year, we have a list of ships that we would like to have as premiums because of their, let's say, pop culture popularity or historical significance. So there are things that are kind of predestined for being premiums. But as we're balancing, um, it's always a question of finding the balance between two philosophies. One of them is that to keep it fair and to keep it from being pay to win, those ships should not be significantly better than tech tree ships. But on the other hand, people who put down money for uh, something that they want to play, they naturally also wanted to perform well. I don't want to say perform better, but perform generally very good, because that's the expectancy behind buying something. So so it's always a kind of balancing act between those two to make it interesting to play, to make it play relatively good, but not to make it too good in comparison to the ships that are played by people who maybe didn't pay any money.
Yeah, it's a hard balancing act between, we want to encourage value with these ships, but then we don't also want to make a game pay to win. It goes both ways, and we have to ride that fine line.
Yeah, obviously historically we've had mixed success. There are some things that maybe should not have come out the way they did, but we try our best, and I'm confident that we're going to learn from those mistakes and not make them again.
Yeah, I think the coolest part about working on this game is that it's always evolving, and that no decision we made is ever set in stone forever. If something really starts irking us the wrong way, like, we're flexible to change things, and we've not been too hard on. Well, we never do it that way, so we should never do this. We should always have a good reason for why we're deciding to do things. So it's definitely been one of the awesome parts about being part of the ships team is the constant evolution of and rethinking of what works and what doesn't.
Yeah, that's definitely true.
You talking about Gamescom real quick. You made a couple cool announcements at Gamescom. Of course, German BBs was a huge announcement. Got released into the game, but you had another ship line. You want to talk about that real quick?
Um, sure. If you, I can talk about all the ships until 2020. We have a schedule to keep. But so at Gamescom, obviously we released German battleships, and then we showed a brief sneak peek, both at the stage and for press, of the British cruiser line, which is the next one upcoming. And well, we just showed the models because those were almost ready. They didn't even have the localization components, so the ships actually didn't have names under them, like when you see the carousel in port. Those were just technical names. But the all of those components should be ready very soon, and they should go into public testing also relatively soon. And we hope to release them either sometime late September or in October, depending on how that balancing act goes. So sometimes we need more time just to be sure.
Yeah. Well, notice one of my questions that wasn't this time Royal Navy when, because I think that one finally has been answered, and we can actually tell people that it is coming in the not so distant future. So finally.
It's actually
um,
funny because we've made that announcement a few times in different community channels before, but somehow it didn't actually come across right. Maybe because it wasn't a real like public announcement. It was just
forum
stated
posts
stated
and
in yeah stated in Q&As on the forums a few times, and people somehow didn't believe that the Royal Navy was coming just after German battleships. It was kind of funny.
yeah, I definitely saw that as well on the forums. Yeah, we do a weekly or not weekly, I should say. We should do a Q&A after each patch, and of course, one of the big questions every single time is always Royal Navy when. So, but this Q&A, we didn't have that question, unsurprisingly. Um, But maybe you can talk about why you think British cruisers are going to be cool and what's unique about them, and what do we know so far?
So a couple of things that I already do know. Um, One of them being that it's the first time that we will have an exclusively light cruiser line. And actually, by now, this is not news anymore because there have already been reviews by YouTubers on YouTube who have said, well, this is a British cruiser line, but it's interesting because it's only light cruisers. So the thing is that we could have done it differently based on the fact that the Royal Navy had so many designs, especially for cruisers, that there is a fair amount of ships to choose from, and we could have like done a mix like with the other tech trees, where in the early tiers you usually have light cruisers just because of World War I design and engineering, and then you progress eventually to heavy cruisers. Or we could have even maybe done a heavy cruiser line. I'm not sure about that, but the thing is that we chose this one because that is an experience that we don't have in the game right now with other cruiser trees. So you don't have exclusively light cruisers at the top tiers. Now this can be polarizing as well for the community because obviously I've already read some comments that people are saying, okay, but this means that they will only have small caliber guns and I want big guns because it's high tier and it's going to be hard to compete. I'm not sure about that. So what this means is that they'll for sure have one type of gameplay. Most likely that'll be typical light cruiser gameplay as you can see it on other ships in the game, which are fitted with 150 millimeter guns. Um, from what I saw from the preliminary stats, most of those ships will be very agile, very fast, and most of them will also be very stealthy. Not to mention that because they have low caliber main guns, those are mostly also dual purpose guns, so they add to your anti-aircraft defenses. So most of these ships will also be very, very good at anti-air. And then on top of all of that, there's one thing that our research guys told us about British naval tactics, and that's that apparently the British Navy used a tactic whereby they would fire single torpedoes from their torpedo launchers. So if you think about how we use torpedoes in the game right now, we usually have a launcher with multiple tubes, and when you press fire, it fires off a spread of torpedoes, basically one from each tube, right? And
Right, fires
this,
off all three or four or whatever.
yeah, and this works for all of the torpedo launchers in the game. So apparently the British didn't do that and were amongst the very few navies that did that, or even the single one. I'm not sure. I'm not an expert, but that's what I was told. So we thought that we would develop a feature where that's possible, and right now this feature is also in testing alongside the British cruisers, and will probably be one of their like unique points. So you'll be able to fire single torpedoes from their torpedo tubes, and
That would be awesome.
this is also quite a polarizing thing if you think about it, because I can imagine that in the beginning a lot of people will say, "Well, I'm used to firing full spreads, so right now it's hard for me to adjust because I died when I thought that I would have fired full spread of torpedoes, but I only fired once, and now I have to click multiple times." But at the same time, I think that players who are proficient in torpedoes and they're generally good at using them, will find that there's a lot of utility in this approach where when they are actually able to judge exactly how much damage they need to finish off an enemy or to hit an enemy and sink it, they will have the opportunity to save torpedoes and potentially do much more damage to different enemies.
Yeah, and I think I can see a lot of really interesting tactical options with that. As a as a Japanese destroyer player, that would be huge. But obviously, for the British cruisers, there's definitely a lot of interesting tactical options you can do. And doing that quick mental math to save a couple torpedoes could be life and death. So that's I'm really excited about that. That should be really cool if we manage to get that in for British cruisers.
If it turns out that this feature becomes becomes, I don't know, so good and makes torpedo gameplay for British cruisers so much better than torpedo gameplay for other ships, then we'll have to look at implementing this type of mechanic for everybody. But for
Yeah.
now, let's see how it goes and how the community like takes to it and likes it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's the best way to go, and trying to test the waters with it and see how things are going, and then if it is awesome, man, yeah, it's a great idea to bring it to other stuff. But it is also cool to make it a unique thing for the British cruisers as well, something kind of to set that line apart from other stuff. So I don't know, I could see it going both ways.
Yeah, me too. And if you think about adding that sort of utility to destroyers, that is kind of scary, and I'm
That
scared of
that
having to balance everything again with the fact that they would be able to save torpedoes.
Yeah, the fact that it's only on cruisers makes it like a little bit less options, but in a good way. Whereas, if you had that in some of the destroyers, like I'm just thinking of like the Smith, but like if you were a tier 10 size torpedoes, like that would be kind of ridiculous.
Yeah, kind of. It's like shooting Smiths out of your torpedo tubes.
Okay, well, hey, let's move on from that though, because I know we've talked about this subject for quite a while now. Of course, one of the questions we see a lot in these Q&As is about high tier gameplay and high tier cruisers, sniping, lack of cruisers. I mean, have you got a sense of how the dev team feels about the high tier gameplay at this point in time? Not even necessarily ranked, but just random battles. 8 to 10.
Um, yeah, so we're let's say we're not very happy with the dynamics. Um, and it's actually hard to describe that without going too deep into stats and and very technical stuff. But it just
Hmm.
doesn't feel as dynamic as mid-tier gameplay right now, and not as and because it's not as dynamic, it doesn't feel as fun. You don't feel that you have a lot of impact. You don't feel that the game is reactive. So there's a few things that we certainly need to address with high tier gameplay. Um, there's been a lot of brainstorming on that side, where we've got a huge list of ideas about how we could potentially fix that. Maybe not even fix, but improve on the current gameplay of high tiers. Those things don't necessarily always make it to production, and some don't even make it to super test for that matter. But when they do make it, you can expect things like Bastion, for example, that come out of that idea mill. So, and to comment briefly on that, I am not a big fan of Bastion as it currently looks like. I think it needs a lot more polishing, and to that effect, I know that the guys are working on adding more environmental components and stuff that you can interact with, which would have different effects on the gameplay. Because right now we just have two things. We basically have one thing that allows you to reveal an area around the map, and another thing that just basically shoots you. So those things are okay, but they don't bring a lot of change into how the game is played. Because if you think about it, those things that give you spotting, they're okay. They give some tactical advantage and a bit of utility to the team, but it's very situational. Because if you think about the ranges that are involved, especially at high tiers, if you're involved in a shooting match, your camo drops so far that most people are visible wherever they are anyway. So this basically just works for seeing whether there are destroyers nearby or not. And those things that just shoot you, well, they're not very different from just another player on the enemy team. So from that perspective, it doesn't necessarily change the gameplay a lot. It just changes just tips of the scale, let's say, onto one side. So what we do want to see is to have different interactions that mainly just cause a different type of behavior and make people do different things and play the game differently than they are now. So one of the things that could include is capturable air bases somewhere around the map, which spawn planes basically to do different things. Obviously, they can also just attack, but that's also just a source of damage. But potentially, they can also do other things. Um, yeah, and things like that.
Do you think once we get it a little more tuned and that we're a little more happy with the mode, there'll be a higher chance to see it? Because I see a lot of people saying that, like, I've played a couple hundred battles at high tiers and I've only seen the mode once or twice, so it's kind of hard for me to get a feel of how good the mode is. Do you think we could increase the chance of it being seen at some point, maybe when we're happier with it?
Yeah, so that's exactly the point. So right now we know that this mode is not for everybody. That's why the chance to get it is very, very small. It's just enough for us to be able to get the stats that we need to see how people are playing it, what the heat maps are, what the like behavior is, all that sort of stuff that we can get from people playing it. But when we add some stuff to it, and when we're reasonably happy that the mode is now, let's say, more well-rounded and offers a better experience for people, then sure, of course, we'll increase the chance to get it, or even include it as a separate choice in a drop down. Although I'm not a big fan of that, but it's all about how different the experience becomes, right? That's why random and ranked are separated. For example, if at some point Bastion should become significantly different from ranked or from randoms, then it should have its own button basically and its own queue.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. I think, and Bastion mode I think has just so much potential to be this huge thing for us, and it has has that potential to do a lot of or have a lot of mechanics in it that make you really change your gameplay, and so I'm definitely excited for where we go with that as well. Real quick, I know we jumped off premiums, but I wanted to go back just real quick talking about premium carriers. I know we released the Saipan a while back, and people, of course, been asking, is there a reason why we haven't released any more premium carriers? Is it just because we don't have any in the pipeline? What is our thoughts on premium carriers for the future? Is it something we'll just never do again, or maybe one day?
So when I was at the community gathering at Gamescom, I got a similar question about generally when people can get new carriers to play with, because for people who do play carriers actively, they mostly already have all of them unlocked. So um, there's a couple of things to say about that. Um, for sure, if we do get a new carrier tree, and we are, but not anytime soon, then that's most likely going to be the British. Um, the other thing to say is that most likely we will not have a German or a Russian carrier tree, just because there's nothing to build them from.
Yeah,
We
it's
could just
just the lack of material.
lack of material, but lack of material comes out of the lack of ships, basically, that just didn't exist during that period. We could, of course, make stuff up. There's probably enough um, projects that we know of for two carrier trees, but then we would have two full carrier trees of just project ships, and that's not necessarily something that we want to do. As far as premium ships are concerned, the reason why we haven't released more premium carriers is that we didn't have any planned for this year, or for that matter, we generally didn't plan premium carriers for a long time, just because we didn't think that they would be a popular choice for people, considering what carrier gameplay looks like right now. So um, for carrier gameplay, we're not really happy with what it is right now. And because of that, we're naturally not planning to sell that experience excessively. We did Saipan because obviously we needed to see how people would react to the idea of a premium carrier. Apparently, people still react positively, even though we're kind of freely admitting that it's not as polished as it could be in terms of carrier gameplay. And that's like a separate topic that we can talk about later. Um, but For next year, there are more premium carriers planned.
Yeah, let's dive right into that as well. Obviously, carrier UI is something we've been really focused on, and then when I talk to the team, their kind of goal is to get more of a feeling of snappiness, like a traditional RTS, like StarCraft, or something that feels a little bit more responsive than what we have now. So that's obviously a big UI thing we're working on for the next few patches, hopefully. But in terms of just like gameplay and balance stuff, what are our thoughts right now on that?
It's not only UI or not exclusively UI. It's mostly actually about controls. So obviously controls are linked to the UI because somehow you need to be aware of them and they need to be displayed. But mostly it's about what the general comfort level and how intuitive they are for you as a player when you get into this. Um, and that's also something that if we kind of manage to improve on that, potentially that will also make carriers less hardcore to play, at least from that side where you need to figure out what to do with your assets, right? Um, and not just figuring out what the interaction of your ship is with other ships. Those are like two different things. First, you need to know what to do with the stuff that you're given on the screen, and then you need to figure out how it interacts with other players so that you can win the game, basically. So the first thing is more about generally getting a feel for the controls, and the second one is getting a sense for how to use your assets effectively to deal damage, what you should do, what you shouldn't do, in yeah, and how to use all the skills that you have and the abilities. But in terms of balancing, that's kind of a never-ending story for us, especially with carriers, and I don't foresee it being any different in the near future. Um, that statement can actually be positive or negative depending on whether you like carriers or don't. Um, but I think that what we're going to do or to look into next is American fighters to kind of, especially at higher tiers, to kind of look into whether we can get it a bit more balanced again. And I'm actually not quite sure what we're going to do after that. That will highly depend on other efforts and on how this first iteration goes. It's always, a step-by-step kind of process. We don't want to, upheave everything at once, just because those changes would then mostly upset people. But step-by-step changes to see whether, the direction we're taking takes it into a zone where it's better, or whether it becomes worse in another way, and then we'll just backtrack on that or not.
It's interesting, like we've talked about how we've switched up our dev cycle very recently, and how we've managed to change so we can iterate so quickly now. I mean, I think the players have definitely been saying all over the place that, wow, you guys are putting out updates like it's going out of style. This is awesome. And part of that is, you said, like, we want to make these incremental updates so that, because we know in 3 weeks we can change things again, so we can see piece by piece. But you make those giant sweeping changes, and you get a lot bigger problems start coming out, and it's a lot harder to diagnose what worked and what didn't after that. So it's a cool thing to have this very fast dev cycle now, but then also kind of be careful in some ways that we make very very careful decisions to try things one at a time. So it's kind of a push and pull, but because things definitely move fast around here, I'll tell you that.
Yeah, it's always the ability to react is good, but it doesn't mean that we should be like making stupid changes all over the game because just because we have the chance to fix mistakes really quickly. So we're also very careful with how much we want to push things into any direction.